My business partner Mark and I built our company from the ground up in a tiny apartment that always smelled like burnt coffee. We provide specialized corporate training, focusing on ethical negotiation and leadership. For 5 years, we were the small, scrappy firm that consistently over-delivered. Then, David Miller called, and everything changed. This is the story of how the biggest opportunity of my life turned into a sophisticated trap, and how I had to become a mirror of the monster I was facing to get out alive. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The call came on a Tuesday. I remember the specific shade of gray the sky was. A flat, uninspiring canvas that matched the mood of our quarterly accounting. We were doing fine, holding our own, but we were plateauing. The big fish, the Fortune 500 companies that could really change our fortunes, were still swimming in a different ocean. Mark was hunched over his monitor, running diagnostics on our newest training module, a complex simulation about hostile takeovers. I was staring at a spreadsheet, trying to figure out how to stretch our marketing budget. That's when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Alicia speaking. Alicia, a smooth, confident voice purred on the other end. David Miller, CEO of Innovate Financial. I've been hearing your name in some very impressive circles. I nearly dropped the phone. Innovate Financial wasn't just a big fish. It was the Kraken of the fintech world. They were legendary for their aggressive growth and their charismatic, almost cult-like CEO. David Miller was a business celebrity, the kind of guy who did keynote speeches at global conferences and had a smile that could disarm regulators. I straightened up in my chair, motioning frantically for Mark to mute his clicking keyboard. Mr. Miller, it's an honor. To what do I owe the pleasure? Please call me David, he said, his tone making it sound like we were already old friends. I've reviewed your firm's work, particularly your principled persuasion framework. It's brilliant. Truly. I think you've cracked a code that the rest of the corporate world is still fumbling with. I want that brilliance inside Innovate. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was the call. Mark was now staring at me, his eyes wide. I put the phone on speaker. David continued, I'm not interested in a one-off seminar, Alicia. I want to propose a long-term exclusive partnership. We want your firm to overhaul our entire leadership development program, from our new hires to our C-suite. We want to build what I'm calling the Innovate Way, and I want you to be its architect. The word exclusive sent a small shiver of apprehension down my spine, but it was quickly drowned out by the sheer scale of his offer. He named a number for the first year's retainer that was more than our total revenue from the previous 2 years combined. It was a figure that meant new equipment, a real office, hiring staff, and maybe even a vacation. It was, in short, life-changing. That's an incredibly generous offer, David, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. It's not generosity, he corrected smoothly. It's an investment. I'm investing in the best. I've already spoken to my head of HR, Emily Chen. She's drawing up a preliminary agreement. We'd love for you and your partner to come to our headquarters tomorrow. 10 a.m. Let's make this happen. The line clicked off before I could even respond. Mark and I just looked at each other in stunned silence for a full minute. Then a slow grin spread across his face. Did that just happen? I think so, I breathed. We spent the rest of the day in a frantic, excited haze, researching David Miller and Innovate Financial even more deeply than we had before. Everything we read painted a picture of a demanding but visionary leader who had built an empire from scratch. The company culture was described as intense, a work hard, play harder environment that rewarded top performers with lavish bonuses and perks. There were a few Glassdoor reviews that mentioned burnout, but that was standard for high-powered tech firms. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The next morning, we walked into the Innovate Financial headquarters. It was less of an office and more of a monument to success. Towering glass walls, minimalist furniture that cost more than my car, and an army of impeccably dressed, bright-eyed employees moving with silent purpose. We were escorted to the top-floor conference room, which had a panoramic view of the entire city. David Miller was even more impressive in person. He was tall, impeccably tailored, and had that rare kind of charisma that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he spoke to you. He greeted us with a firm handshake and that famous smile. Alicia, Mark, welcome. I'm so glad you could make it. Also in the room was Emily Chen, the head of HR. She was sharp, professional, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Where David was all warmth and energy, Emily was reserved and analytical. She nodded politely but said little, her focus entirely on the tablet in front of her. The meeting was a whirlwind. David didn't negotiate. He presented a vision. He painted a picture of our two companies working in perfect synergy. He flattered our work, quoting specific lines from articles I had written years ago. He made it clear that this wasn't just a contract. It was an invitation to join the inner circle of one of the most successful companies on the planet. He glossed over the exclusivity clause with a casual wave of his hand. That's just to ensure we have your undivided attention as we build this new foundation together, he explained. It protects our investment in you, and frankly, it protects your focus. You won't have to worry about chasing other clients. You can just focus on doing your best work. It sounded so reasonable when he said it. He was leveraging a classic compliance tactic, commitment and consistency. By getting us to agree to the grand vision, the smaller, more restrictive details seemed like logical next steps. Emily Chen presented the contract. It was thick, dense with legalese, but the financial terms were exactly what he had promised. There were clauses about intellectual property, stating that all customized materials developed for Innovate would be co-owned, which seemed fair enough at the time. We were creating work specifically for them, after all. The penalties for breaking the exclusivity agreement were steep, a figure that would bankrupt our small company several times over. We have our lawyer on standby to review this, I said, trying to sound like a seasoned professional and not someone completely out of her depth. David smiled warmly. Of course, take all the time you need. But Alicia, I hope you see the spirit of this document. It's not about restriction, it's about partnership. We're ready to sign today if you are. I have a press release drafted announcing our collaboration. I'd love to send it out by the end of the day. He was creating a sense of urgency, another classic persuasion technique. He was making us feel like we were part of a fast-moving train, and we had to jump on now or be left behind. Mark and I exchanged a look. Our lawyer would take days, maybe a week, to go through a contract this dense. By then, David's enthusiasm might have cooled. This was our shot. Against my better judgment, a little voice in the back of my head screaming about due diligence, I heard myself say, "Where do we sign?" David's smile widened. He slid the pens across the vast mahogany table. "Welcome to the family," he said. As my pen scratched against the paper, I felt a surge of triumph, and a tiny, almost imperceptible knot of dread in my stomach. I told myself it was just nerves. It was the biggest deal of our lives. Of course I was nervous. I had no idea that I wasn't signing a contract. I was walking into a cage and David Miller was holding the key. The offer was perfect, polished, and presented with a master's touch. It was designed to be unrefusable. And we, eager and ambitious, had taken the bait. We didn't just sign a document, we signed away our independence. The first month was a dream. The money from the retainer hit our account, and it felt like monopoly money. We immediately moved out of our cramped apartment office and into a sleek, modern space downtown. We hired a small administrative staff. Mark bought a new server array that he'd been dreaming about for years. We were finally legitimate. The press release David sent out had a huge impact, and our professional profiles blew up overnight. We were the brilliant young firm handpicked by the legendary David Miller. It was intoxicating. The work itself was intense but exhilarating. We were given unprecedented access to Innovate's inner workings. We interviewed department heads, sat in on strategy meetings, and analyzed years of internal performance data. David was our champion, clearing bureaucratic hurdles and ensuring everyone cooperated. "Alicia has my full support," he'd say in meetings, and any resistance would instantly melt away. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the nature of our relationship with David began to shift. The partnership started to feel more like ownership. The golden handcuffs began to tighten. It started with the small requests. "Alicia," he'd call, often late in the evening. "I was just thinking about your module on conflict resolution. Could you tweak it to address the specific rivalries between our sales and development teams? And I need it for a presentation tomorrow morning." The first few times I was eager to please. I'd stay up late, tailoring our proprietary, carefully generalized material to fit his specific immediate needs. Mark would grumble about the extra work, but the paychecks were so good, his complaints were half-hearted. We were in a honeymoon period, fueled by success and validation. We told ourselves this was what it meant to have a major client. This was just the hustle. Then the requests became more demanding. He wasn't just asking for tweaks anymore. He was asking for raw materials. "Mark," he said on a conference call, "your simulation software is incredible. To fully integrate it, my tech team needs access to the source code. Just for compatibility purposes, of course." Mark physically recoiled from the phone. "David, the code is our entire business. It's the engine under the hood. We can't just hand that over." David laughed it off, his voice a soothing balm of reason. "I understand your concern, Mark. Think of it this way. We're not asking you to give it to us. We're asking you to let us help you integrate it more deeply into our systems. It's about creating a seamless experience for our employees. It stays your property, naturally. The contract protects you. This is about efficiency. We're on the same team here." He was a master at reframing. He took a request that was a massive overreach and made it sound like a logical, collaborative necessity. He was invoking the principle of unity. We're on the same team, to lower our defenses. Reluctantly, feeling cornered and not wanting to appear difficult, Mark agreed to allow supervised access for David's tech team. The handcuffs tightened another notch. The exclusivity clause, which had seemed like a vote of confidence in the beginning, now felt like a leash. We had to turn down 2 smaller but interesting projects from other companies because our contract forbade it. We were completely dependent on Innovate, and David knew it. His requests were always couched in the language of partnership, but they felt like commands. He was an expert at creating a sense of social obligation. He had given us this incredible opportunity, so how could we deny him these small favors? His charm was his most potent weapon. After making a particularly demanding request, he would follow it up with an act of immense generosity. He sent a case of vintage wine to my apartment after I worked through a weekend to finish a report for him. He gave Mark and his wife courtside tickets to a basketball game. These weren't just gifts. They were strategic maneuvers. They were designed to make us feel grateful and indebted, making it even harder to push back on his next overreach. It was a classic good cop, bad cop routine, except he played both roles. Emily Chen, the head of HR, was a constant, quiet presence in the background. We met with her weekly to discuss the project's progress. She was always polite and professional, but there was a guardedness about her I couldn't penetrate. When I'd mention the escalating demands from David, she would just nod and say, "David is very passionate about this project. He sees its potential." Her responses were always perfectly neutral, giving away nothing. She was an enigma, and I couldn't tell if she was a gatekeeper for David or simply a loyal employee navigating a difficult boss. The breaking point for me came about 4 months in. We had developed a comprehensive 5-day leadership boot camp, which we considered the crown jewel of our curriculum. It was the result of years of research and refinement. We ran the first one for Innovate's senior managers, and it was a massive success. The feedback was glowing. 2 weeks later, David called me. "Alicia, fantastic work on the boot camp. Truly phenomenal. I have an idea to leverage it. I want to create an internal certification program. We'll call it Miller Method Certified Leadership." I felt a cold prickle on my skin. "The Miller Method?" "David, that's our curriculum. We call it the Vance Robinson Framework." He laughed, a sound that was starting to lose its charm. "Catchy name, but it doesn't have the right ring for an internal brand. The Miller Method sounds strong, decisive. It aligns with the Innovate brand. Don't worry, you and Mark will be credited in the materials, of course. This is about marketing it to the staff, making them want it." He was taking our work, our identity, and stamping his own name on it. The phrase "credited in the materials" meant our names would be in small print on the last page of a workbook nobody would read. He was taking ownership, not just of the customized work, but of the very soul of our company. When I tried to argue, he deployed his trap. "Alicia," he said, his voice laced with practiced disappointment. "I thought we were partners in this. I brought you in, gave you a platform you could only dream of. I'm trying to elevate your work, to make it legendary within these walls. Are you really going to let a little thing like a name get in the way of that? I'm shocked. I thought you saw the bigger picture." He was framing my legitimate concern as petty. He was questioning my commitment, triggering a desire to prove my loyalty and get back in his good graces. This was the compliance trap in its purest form. He had created a situation where compliance, letting him steal our brand, felt like the path of least resistance, while defiance felt like an act of betrayal and foolishness. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I looked around our beautiful new office, at the comfortable chairs and the gleaming tech. It all felt like a cage. A beautiful, comfortable, gilded cage. The handcuffs were no longer just tight. They were starting to cut into the skin. We had the success we had always wanted, but we were losing the one thing we started the business for in the first place: ourselves. We were becoming a subsidiary of David Miller's ego, and I realized, with a sickening lurch, that if we didn't find a way to get these handcuffs off, we would eventually lose our hands entirely. The dream had become a prison. After the Miller Method incident, the atmosphere shifted. The initial excitement of the contract had completely evaporated, replaced by a low-grade, persistent anxiety. Mark and I were working harder than ever, but the joy was gone. We were fulfilling our obligations, cashing the checks, and feeling emptier with each passing week. David's charm had worn so thin it was transparent, and now I could see the cold, calculating machinery beneath it. My nights were spent staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, trying to pinpoint where we had gone so wrong. It was then that I began to notice the pattern. It wasn't in what David said. It was in what he didn't say. It was a pattern of strategic silence and omission. The first piece was the lack of public credit. In the beginning, he had been eager to attach our name to the project. The initial press release was all about the brilliant firm Vance Robinson that Innovate was partnering with. But after that, our name vanished. When David gave interviews about Innovate's incredible new company culture, he talked about our new internal leadership initiative. When he spoke at an industry conference, he presented concepts I had personally taught him as his own insights. He never mentioned us. We were ghosts in our own machine. I brought this up to him once, as gently as I could. David, we were hoping the public-facing materials for the new training platform would have some co-branding, like we originally discussed. He waved it off dismissively. Alicia, that stuff clutters the message. It's about the Innovate brand. Strong, singular, internal cohesion. You understand? He didn't argue. He simply stated his decision as an obvious fact, making any counter-argument seem naive. His silence on our contribution was deliberate. He was slowly erasing us from the narrative. The second part of the pattern was financial. Our contract stipulated potential performance bonuses based on the adoption and success of our programs. According to all the metrics we could see, the programs were a massive hit. Employee engagement scores were up, and departmental feedback was stellar. Yet whenever I'd inquire about the bonus structure, David would become vague. "We're still compiling the data," he'd say. Or, "Let's focus on the rollout for now and talk numbers next quarter." The silence around our earned bonuses was a way of keeping us perpetually chasing a carrot he had no intention of letting us catch. Mark started noticing a similar pattern on the technical side. "It's weird," he said one afternoon, frowning at a screen full of code. His tech team is always asking for help on the integration. But they're not just integrating, they're replicating. They're building their own versions of our diagnostic tools, using our logic, our architecture. They ask me 1,000 questions about why I built a certain function a certain way, and then a week later, I see a new tool in their internal system that does the exact same thing, just with a different user interface. They weren't integrating. They were strip mining our intellectual property. They were learning how to build our car so they could throw us out and drive it themselves. The silence here was the lack of any conversation about licensing or IP transfer. They were simply taking it, confident that the complexity of the tech and the density of the contract would obscure their theft. The most chilling discovery came from a conversation with Emily Chen. I had scheduled our weekly meeting under the pretense of discussing the next phase of training, but my real goal was to probe. I had started to see her less as David's accomplice and more as a prisoner in the same system, just with a longer sentence. "Emily," I began, choosing my words carefully. "We're thrilled with the employee uptake, but we're struggling to get a clear picture of the long-term vision. David is brilliant at the big ideas, but the details on how our role evolves seem undefined." She looked up from her notes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than corporate neutrality in her eyes. It might have been sympathy, David's vision is always long-term, she said, her voice low and even. He believes in fully absorbing our partner's strengths to make the company stronger. Absorbing. The word hung in the air between us. It was such a sterile corporate term for what felt like consumption. It sounded like a snake digesting its meal. And what happens to the partners after they're absorbed? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Emily looked towards her office door, as if to ensure it was closed. Innovate Financial has had many successful partnerships over the years, she said, reciting what sounded like a company line. Then she broke script. She leaned forward slightly and her voice dropped. I've been in HR for 15 years, Alicia. I've seen a lot of contracts. A pattern I've noticed is that sometimes small, innovative companies, they get an incredible opportunity to work with a market leader. They get a huge boost in profile. And then, a year or two later, you hear they've gone out of business. Their key people often end up working for the larger company. It's a volatile market. She didn't mention David. She didn't mention Innovate. She spoke in generalities, but the message was crystal clear. This was his playbook. This was what he did. He didn't just partner with companies. He consumed them. He would use us, drain us of our knowledge and our IP, and then, when our usefulness was exhausted, he would terminate the contract, leaving us with a non-compete clause and a hollowed-out company. He would then hire our best people, if he wanted them, and our partnership would be a footnote in his triumphant corporate history. The silence was the sound of our future being erased. All the vague promises, the postponed conversations about bonuses, the lack of public credit, the systematic replication of our tech, it all clicked into place. It wasn't a series of isolated issues. It was a deliberate, methodical strategy. A compliance trap isn't just about getting someone to say yes. It's about creating a system of agreement and obligation that allows you to slowly take everything from them while they're too busy complying to notice. I left Emily's office with a cold certainty. We weren't partners. We were prey. The silence I had been sensing for months was the quiet, patient stalking of a predator, and I knew, with absolute clarity, that if we didn't do something drastic, we were going to be devoured. The discovery was complete. We weren't in a bad deal. We were in a fight for our company's life. The knowledge of David's plan was a heavy weight. It settled in my gut, a cold, hard stone of anger and fear. My first instinct was to confront him, to call him out on his deception. But I knew that would be a fatal mistake. Our contract was a fortress he had built around himself. A direct accusation without ironclad proof would be dismissed as a misunderstanding, and he would use it as a pretext to terminate our agreement for unprofessional behavior, likely suing us into oblivion with the penalty clauses. We couldn't fight him head-on. We had to be smarter. He's a boa constrictor, Mark said grimly when I laid out everything I had learned from Emily and my own observations. He's wrapping himself around us so slowly we're supposed to not notice until we can't. Breathe. He spun around in his chair and stared at the whiteboard where we had once so excitedly mapped out our plans for Innovate. So what do? How do we fight a ghost? We prove he's not a ghost, I replied, a new sense of resolve hardening my voice. We find the proof. We document everything. We turn his own corporate structure against him. And so our investigation began. We started living a double life. By day, we were the compliant, eager partners, delivering our work on time and keeping smiles on our faces. By night, we were forensic accountants and digital detectives, piecing together the evidence of David's systematic theft. Our first step was to create a meticulous log. Every phone call, every email, every offhand request from David was documented with the date, time, and specific details. His verbal promises, his deflections about bonuses, his claims of partnership, it all went into a secure file. A single instance was just a conversation. 100 instances painted a clear picture of manipulation. Next, Mark focused on the technology. He couldn't directly accuse David's team of replicating his code, but he could track their activities. He started embedding subtle, harmless trackers in the code snippets he shared. They were like digital breadcrumbs. He could see when and how they were accessing the information and, more importantly, where they were pasting it. Got one. He'd mutter late at night, pointing at his screen. They took the core logic from our predictive analytics module. It's now running on an internal server named Project Chimera. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Project Chimera. It was the perfect name for a beast made of stolen parts. Mark began taking time-stamped screenshots and documenting every piece of our code that reappeared inside Innovate's walled garden. The digital trail was becoming undeniable. My side of the investigation was focused on the human element. I knew there had to be other people inside Innovate who were aware of David's methods. Emily Chen was my prime candidate, but I knew she was too cautious to be a direct source. Pushing her too hard could risk her career and alert David. Instead, I focused on building quiet alliances. I started spending more time in the Innovate offices, not in the executive suites, but in the trenches. I'd have coffee with mid-level managers, the ones who had been on the receiving end of our training. I'd listen to their frustrations, their stories. I wasn't digging for dirt on David directly. I was learning the political landscape of the company. I learned who was loyal to him, who feared him, and who quietly resented him. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior project manager in the HR department, a young man named Leo, had been a huge champion of our training program. He truly believed in its ethical framework. I was having lunch with him in the company cafeteria when he mentioned a previous partnership that had ended abruptly. Yeah, it was a small data analytics firm called Cognix Systems, he said, picking at his salad. They were amazing. Here for about a year, David loved them. Then one day they were just gone. It was weird. Their platform was fully integrated into our systems, and then suddenly we were told all communication with them was to cease. 2 months later, David announced Innovate's new proprietary data analysis suite. A lot of us on the ground floor felt it was shady. My heart skipped a beat. Cognix Systems, I repeated, committing the name to memory. That night, I went down a rabbit hole of research. Cognix Systems was, as Leo had said, gone. Their website was defunct. Their office was closed. But I found the names of the founders. One of them, a woman named Sarah, had a sparse LinkedIn profile. It said she was now a freelance consultant. There was a contact email. With a deep breath, I wrote to her. I told her I was the founder of a small consultancy currently working with Innovate Financial, and that I admired the work her former company had done. I asked if she'd be willing to have a brief, confidential chat about her experience in the industry. To my surprise, she replied within an hour. Happy to chat, the email read. I have some insights that might be valuable to you. The video call with Sarah was a revelation. She looked tired, older than her profile picture suggested. The story she told was our own, just a year ahead. The charming CEO, the unrefusable offer, the exclusive contract, the constant demands, the slow absorption of their IP, and finally, the sudden termination once they had nothing left to give. He called it a strategic sunsetting of the partnership, Sarah said with a bitter laugh. He bankrupted us. We couldn't fight back. The contract was airtight, and he had a legion of lawyers. He even tried to hire my lead engineer after he'd destroyed my company. The arrogance of it still keeps me up at night. But Sarah had done one smart thing. Before they were locked out of the system, her partner had downloaded a series of emails between David and his legal team. Emails where they explicitly discussed the strategy of absorbing Cognix core assets without the expense of an acquisition. It wasn't enough to win a lawsuit they couldn't afford, but it was a smoking gun. She had been holding on to it, waiting for a moment, for someone who could actually use it. She agreed to send them to me. When the encrypted file arrived, I felt a tremor of both fear and vindication. Opening it felt like crossing a point of no return. The emails were everything Sarah had said. Cold, clinical, and utterly damning. They laid out the entire vendor absorption playbook. I now had the what, the how, and the why. I had Mark's digital evidence, I had my log of manipulations, and now I had proof that this was a premeditated pattern of behavior. I saw the cracks in David Miller's perfect facade. He wasn't just an unethical businessman. He was a serial predator. His confidence wasn't born of brilliance, but of a belief that he was untouchable, and that, I realized, was his weakness. He never expected his prey to fight back. He never expected us to be investigating him while he was busy consuming us. Holding the evidence felt like holding a live grenade. We had the power to expose David, but a single misstep could blow up in our faces. A lawsuit was still a non-starter. It would be a long, brutal, and public war of attrition that Innovate, with its deep pockets and army of lawyers, was built to win. Even if we eventually won, our small firm would be a casualty of the conflict. We couldn't win by playing his game. We had to create our own, He used a compliance trap to get us in, I said to Mark, pacing back and forth in our office late one night. The city lights twinkled outside, oblivious to the corporate warfare we were planning. So we have to use one to get ourselves out. We have to build a trap that he is psychologically incapable of avoiding. David's entire persona was built on being the visionary, the innovator, the master of the corporate universe. His ego was his greatest strength and his most profound vulnerability. He needed to be seen as the smartest person in every room. He needed to be the one announcing the next big thing. Our plan had to leverage that ego and turn it into a weapon against him. The plan, which we codenamed Operation Trojan Horse, had 3 phases. Phase 1 was compliant over-delivery. We would stop fighting his small requests. In fact, we would embrace them. We would become the most helpful, most integrated, most indispensable partners he had ever had. We would deliver our work not just on time, but ahead of schedule. We would provide extra analysis he didn't ask for. We would make ourselves so valuable, so enmeshed in Innovate's daily operations, that the idea of us leaving would seem catastrophic to the company's momentum. This would lull him into a false sense of absolute control and make him greedy for more. Phase 2 was the digital handshake. This was Mark's genius. As David's team continued to replicate our tech, Mark wouldn't block them. He would help them. He would provide them with our most advanced, unreleased training modules for their Project Chimera platform. But these new modules would have a hidden payload. It wasn't a virus or anything destructive. It was a piece of code Mark called the beacon. It was dormant, undetectable, and embedded in the very core of the modules. On Mark's command, the beacon could activate. When activated, it wouldn't crash the system. Instead, every single time a user completed a training module, it would generate a digital certificate of completion. A certificate that was co-branded with the Vance Robinson logo and contained the phrase "powered by the pool," proprietary framework of Vance Robinson Consulting. It would also send an email with this certificate to the user and their direct manager. It was a digital watermark that, once activated, would be impossible to remove without taking the entire platform offline. It would instantly and irrevocably re-establish our ownership in the minds of every employee. Phase 3 was the new offer. This was my part, the psychological trap. Once we were fully integrated and the Trojan horse was in place, I would go to David with a grand proposal. I wouldn't ask for credit or money. I would pitch him a new vision, an idea so big and so appealing to his ego that he wouldn't be able to resist taking credit for it. I would propose Innovate University, a new standalone business venture. Innovate would package our co-developed training platform, his beloved Project Chimera, and sell it to other corporations. It was his own secret plan, the one we knew he was working on, but I would present it as my idea, a gift to him. I would frame it as the logical next step in our partnership, a way to monetize the incredible work he had commissioned. I would tell him that to make it a legitimate, marketable product, it needed a public launch, a press conference, and a new formalized partnership agreement that would legally cement the venture. This was the core of the trap. To claim his prize, he would have to step out into the light. He'd have to put his name and the company's name on a public venture built on our stolen work, and he would have to sign a new contract to govern it, a contract that we would write. This new contract would be our escape route and our revenge. It would contain clauses that looked innocuous, but were legally devastating. It would retroactively assign clear and unambiguous ownership of all core curriculum and source code to our firm. It would specify enormous, immediate financial penalties for any past or future use of our IP without proper licensing. It would mandate that all public-facing materials, press releases, and digital platforms feature our company's branding as the founding technology partner. And most importantly, it would contain a mutual non-disparagement and confidentiality clause, but with a specific exception. The clause would be rendered void if there was a good faith reporting of unethical or illegal business practices to the board of directors. The plan was audacious, and the risks were immense. For the next 2 months, we executed it flawlessly. We worked tirelessly, anticipating David's needs, solving problems before he knew they existed. We became his favorite tool. As we predicted, his arrogance grew in proportion to our compliance. He saw us not as partners, but as extensions of his own will. Mark, under the guise of collaborative development, successfully embedded the beacon into the heart of Project Chimera. He even got an internal award from David's tech division for his cooperative spirit. Finally, the day came. I requested a meeting with David. I walked into his office, the same one where we had signed our future away nearly a year ago. This time I wasn't intimidated. I was a hunter. I pitched him Innovate University. I watched his eyes light up as I described the potential revenue, the industry prestige, the legacy. I saw the gears turning in his head as he instantly internalized the idea as his own. "This is brilliant, Alicia," he said, leaning back in his chair, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Truly visionary. It's exactly where I've been wanting to take this. You've just articulated it perfectly. To do this right, we need to formalize it," I said, barely able to keep the tremor of adrenaline out of my voice. "A new agreement, a public launch. We need to show the world that Innovate is not just a financial company, but a leader in human capital development." "Absolutely," he boomed, already seeing the magazine covers. "Have Emily Chen work with you on the paperwork. Let's get this done. I want to announce it at the next quarterly shareholder meeting." He had taken the bait. He had eagerly led the Trojan horse inside his own gates. The rules had been rewritten. Now all we had to do was wait for the right moment to spring the trap. The weeks leading up to the shareholder meeting were the most stressful of my life. We were in constant communication with Emily Chen's office, hammering out the details of the new Innovate University partnership agreement. I drafted the key clauses myself, burying our poison pills in dense pages of standard legal text. To my surprise, their legal team barely glanced at the IP and attribution clauses, focusing instead on the financial percentages and revenue-sharing models. David's greed made them blind. They were so focused on how much money they would make that they didn't stop to secure the foundation of what they were selling. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived. It was being held in a large auditorium at a downtown hotel. The room was filled with investors, analysts, and business journalists. David was in his element, pacing the stage like a rock star, dazzling the crowd with charts showing record profits. He was saving his grand announcement for the end of his presentation. Mark and I were seated in the front row, right next to Emily Chen and the rest of the executive board. We were there to be trotted out as the loyal partners in David's grand vision. My heart was a drum against my ribs. In my pocket, my phone was set to a single hotkey that would send a pre-written text to Mark. "Now." That was the signal to activate the beacon. "And now," David said, his voice resonating through the auditorium, "I want to share with you our next great leap forward. We've always been a technology company, but our greatest asset is our people, and we have perfected a system for developing that asset, a system so powerful, so effective that we believe it's time to share it with the world." He gestured to the massive screen behind him, where the logo for Project Chimera flashed, quickly replaced by a sleek new one, Innovate University. The crowd murmured with interest. Innovate University will be a new subsidiary, licensing our proprietary leadership and development platform to other Fortune 500 companies. It represents a new, multi-billion-dollar revenue stream, built on the unique culture of excellence we have fostered. He was taking sole credit. Of course he was. My hand tightened around the phone in my pocket. "Not yet." He then introduced me. "Our partner in developing the initial framework, Alicia from Vance Robinson Consulting, is here with us today." He gestured for me to stand. I stood up and gave a small, polite wave. The applause was muted. I was a footnote. It was perfect. David then directed everyone's attention to the tablets that had been placed at each seat. "We're giving you all a live demonstration. You can now access a sample module from the Innovate University curriculum on your devices. Experience the future of corporate training for yourselves." This was the moment. As hundreds of the world's most influential investors and journalists tapped on their screens, logging into the platform, my thumb pressed down on the hotkey. I sent the text. "Now." I watched the board members on my row. One of them, the company's CFO, completed the short demo module. A moment later, he frowned at his tablet. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it, his frown deepening. He turned to the person next to him and showed him the screen. I could see it clearly. A digital certificate of completion for the module. And at the bottom, in crisp, clear lettering, was our logo next to the words, "Powered by the proprietary framework of Vance Robinson Consulting." A low buzz began to spread through the auditorium as hundreds of people received the same certificate. The same email. It was a quiet, digital rebellion rippling through the heart of David's triumphant moment. On stage, David hadn't noticed yet. He was wrapping up, his smile as wide as ever. Innovate University is the future. It is the culmination of our vision, and it is ready to launch. This was my cue. I stood up. I hadn't been scheduled to speak, and a security guard took a step towards me, but I ignored him and walked calmly to the small podium set up on the floor for Q&A. "David, if I may," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone, clear and steady. The entire room turned to look at me. David's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Alicia," a bit eager, but of course. "What is it?" "I just wanted to thank you for announcing the launch of Innovate University," I said, my voice ringing with false sincerity. "And as the owners of the core intellectual property and technology platform it is built on. My partner and I are thrilled to finally be moving forward under the new, equitable partnership agreement that your legal team signed this morning." A gasp went through the audience. David's face went from confused to pale. "What? What are you talking about?" "It's Innovate's proprietary platform." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "Then why did every person in this room just receive a certificate from our company, Vance Robinson Consulting, for completing your demo?" "Mark, could you please activate the platform's administrative backend on the main screen?" On stage, the Innovate University logo vanished, replaced by the admin login screen for the platform. Emblazoned across the top was our company's name. Mark had built a backdoor. David's tech team never even saw it. David was speechless. His face was a mask of fury. The trap was sprung. "Under the terms of the agreement you signed," I continued, my voice cold and precise, "Innovate Financial has retroactively licensed our technology. It also stipulates that any public announcement such as this one must properly credit us as the founding partner. Failure to do so incurs significant financial penalties. I believe this announcement qualifies." The board members were now staring at David, their expressions ranging from shock to horror. They were realizing that the venture he had just announced was not fully theirs and was now mired in a public dispute. I had one last card to play. I looked directly at Emily Chen and the rest of the board. "Furthermore, we have become aware of a pattern of unethical business practices by Mr. Miller concerning intellectual property. We have substantial evidence, including documentation from the former company Cognic Systems, which we are prepared to deliver to this board under the whistleblower protection clause in our new contract. We believe the board would want to investigate these liabilities immediately to protect its shareholders." The mention of Cognic Systems was the final blow. I saw a flash of recognition and fear in the eyes of one of the older board members. This wasn't the first time they'd had to clean up one of David's messes. David started to speak, to bluster, to deny, but his voice was drowned out by the frantic whispering of the crowd and the clicking of cameras. His grand moment, his magnum opus, had been publicly hijacked. He wasn't the visionary on stage anymore. He was the villain in someone else's story. My story. He had walked into my trap, blinded by his own ego, and with a few quiet words, I had taken everything from him. The confrontation wasn't a shouting match. It was a quiet, public execution.